The shrill ring of the doorbell pierced the quiet night, sending a jolt through my body. I froze, my hand hovering over the bowl of popcorn I'd just prepared. Who could be at the door at this hour? I glanced at the clock on the microwave. 11:43 p.m. My husband Mark was away on a business trip, and I wasn't expecting anyone. We lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where unexpected late-night visitors were practically unheard of. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. My heart began to race. Should I answer it? What if someone was in trouble and needed help? But then again, what if... I shook my head, trying to dispel the unsettling thoughts creeping into my mind. I'm being paranoid, I told myself. It's probably just a neighbor with an emergency. Leaving the popcorn on the kitchen counter, I cautiously made my way to the front door. The house was dark except for the soft glow of the TV in the living room. I hadn't bothered to turn on many lights since I was planning to watch a movie alone. As I approached the door, I could see a silhouette through the frosted glass panels on either side. It appeared to be a man, tall and broad-shouldered. My hand hesitated on the doorknob as another wave of unease washed over me. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry. "Hello? Can I help you?" Still nothing. The silhouette remained motionless. A chill ran down my spine. Something wasn't right. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Should I call the police? But what would I tell them? That I was scared of a shadow? Just as I was reaching for my phone, the doorbell rang again, 3 sharp, aggressive buzzes that made me jump. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "I'm calling the police." The silhouette moved then, stepping away from the door. I watched as it disappeared from view. A wave of relief washed over me. He's leaving, I thought. It's over. But then I heard it. Footsteps on the wooden boards of our front porch, moving slowly around the side of the house. My relief evaporated instantly, replaced by a fresh surge of panic. I rushed to the kitchen, grabbing my cell phone from the counter. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely unlock the screen. As I pulled up the phone app, a loud thud came from the back of the house, followed by the sound of scraping metal. "Oh, God," I thought. He's trying the back door. I dialed 911, pressing the phone to my ear as I moved through the house, checking that all the windows and doors were locked. The line rang once, twice. Another thud, louder this time, echoed through the house. It was coming from the sunroom at the back. We'd been meaning to replace the old, worn lock on the door out there. Had we done it? I couldn't remember. 911. What's your emergency? The operator's calm voice was a lifeline in the growing chaos of my fear. "There's someone trying to break into my house," I whispered urgently. "I'm alone. Please, send someone quickly." I rattled off my address as I made my way to the sunroom, dreading what I might find. The operator assured me that officers were on their way, but it did little to calm my nerves. As I approached the sunroom, I could hear a rhythmic scratching sound. My blood ran cold. He was picking the lock. "Stay on the line with me," the operator instructed. "Find a safe place to hide and stay there until the officers arrive." I nodded, forgetting she couldn't see me. Where could I hide? The bedroom seemed too obvious. The closets were too small. Then I remembered the attic. We had a pull-down attic ladder in the hallway ceiling. Mark used it for storage, but I rarely went up there. It wasn't the most comfortable spot, but it was out of the way and not an obvious hiding place. I was about to make a dash for the hallway when a new sound stopped me in my tracks. The distinct click of a lock giving way, followed by the creak of the sunroom door opening. He was inside. Panic threatened to overwhelm me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I forced myself to stay quiet. Moving as silently as I could, I crept towards a hallway. Every shadow seemed to loom larger. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like a gunshot in the tense silence. I could hear him moving through the sunroom, his footsteps slow and deliberate, He wasn't even trying to be quiet. The realization sent a fresh wave of terror through me. He wasn't worried about being caught. He thought he had all the time in the world. I reached the attic access and stretched up to grab the pole cord. It was just out of reach. I cursed silently, wishing I'd worn shoes instead of socks. I bounced on my toes, fingers grasping. The cord slipped through my fingers, and the metal pull-down ladder came clattering down with a thunderous racket in the quiet house. For a moment, everything was still. Then I heard his footsteps quicken, moving purposefully towards the noise. Adrenaline surged through me. I scrambled up the ladder, my socks slipping on the metal rungs. I could hear him getting closer, his heavy footfalls echoing through the house. I hauled myself into the attic, my arms trembling with the effort. Dust filled my nose, making me want to sneeze. I fought against it, knowing any noise could give away my position. "Ma'am, are you still there? What's happening?" The operator's voice in my ear made me jump. I'd almost forgotten about the phone. "He's in the house," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I'm hiding in the attic." "Okay, stay calm. The officers are almost there." I wanted to laugh hysterically. Stay calm? There was an intruder in my house, and I was trapped in a dusty attic with no way out. I heard the intruder's footsteps directly below me now. He was in the hallway, right under the attic access. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't think to look up. The footsteps paused. I could almost feel him considering, wondering where I could be hiding. My whole body was tense, poised for what? I didn't know. Fight? Flight? In this enclosed space, I had no options. A long moment passed. Then, to my immense relief, the footsteps began to move away, towards the bedrooms. I allowed myself to breathe again, taking in shallow breaths to minimize noise. The air in the attic was stale and thick with dust. Cobwebs clung to my hair and skin, but I didn't dare move to brush them away. I strained my ears, trying to track the intruder's movements through the house. I could hear doors opening and closing, drawers being pulled out. He was searching, methodically making his way through each room. What was he looking for? Valuables? Or me? The thought sent a shudder through me. I tried to push it away, focusing instead on my surroundings. Moonlight filtered in through a small round window, casting eerie shadows among the stored boxes and old furniture. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I began to make out shapes: an old rocking chair, stacks of Christmas decorations, a broken lamp. My gaze landed on something that made my heart leap: a heavy, old baseball bat leaning against a stack of boxes. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Moving as quietly as I could, I crawled towards the bat. Every slight noise, the rustle of my clothes, the creak of the floorboards, sounded deafening to my hyper-alert ears. Just as my fingers closed around the bat's handle, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold: the metallic scrape of the attic ladder being extended. He knew. Somehow, he knew I was up here. I gripped the bat tightly, my palms sweaty against the worn wood. My whole body was trembling, a mix of fear and adrenaline coursing through my veins. The ladder creaked as he began to climb. Each sound brought him closer, and I found myself backing away, deeper into the shadows of the attic. I could see his hands first, gripping the edge of the attic floor. Then his head appeared, followed by his shoulders. In the dim moonlight, I couldn't make out his features clearly, but I could see he was wearing dark clothes and a cap pulled low over his face. He hauled himself up into the attic, his movements smooth and controlled. He was in good shape, clearly not some desperate drug addict looking for a quick score. This was someone who knew what he was doing. The realization only heightened my terror. I clutched the bat so tightly my knuckles were white, raising it in what I hoped was a threatening manner. "Stay back," I warned, my voice shakier than I'd intended. "The police are on their way." He paused, cocking his head to one side as if considering my words. Then, slowly, he reached into his pocket. My breath caught in my throat. Was he pulling out a weapon? I tensed, ready to swing the bat with all my might if he came any closer. But instead of a gun or a knife, he pulled out something small and metallic. In the faint light, I saw a flash of gold. "Sarah?" His voice was familiar, achingly so. "It's me. It's Mark." The bat slipped from my nerveless fingers, clattering to the floor. "And Mark?" I stammered, unable to believe what I was seeing. He stepped closer, and I could finally see his face clearly. It was my husband, looking tired and worried. "What? How? You're supposed to be in Chicago," I managed to say, my mind reeling. "I came home early to surprise you," he explained, his voice filled with regret. "I lost my keys, so I tried ringing the bell. When you didn't answer, I got worried and tried to find another way in. I'm so sorry, honey. I didn't mean to scare you." The adrenaline that had been keeping me going suddenly drained away, leaving me weak and shaky. I sank to my knees, overcome with relief and lingering fear and confusion. Mark was by my side in an instant, wrapping his arms around me. I buried my face in his chest, breathing in his familiar scent, finally allowing myself to feel safe. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. The police, arriving at last to a scene very different from what they were expecting. As the sound grew louder, I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bordering on hysterical. "We have a lot of explaining to do," I said, looking up at Mark. He nodded, a rueful smile on his face. "Next time, I think I'll just call ahead." The blinking red light on my phone caught my eye as I scrolled mindlessly through social media. 2% battery. I plugged it in, grateful I'd noticed before it died completely. Little did I know, that small act of charging my phone would be the thread I'd cling to in the terrifying hours to come. It was supposed to be a quiet night at home. My parents had left for their anniversary weekend getaway, entrusting me, their responsible 17-year-old son, to hold down the fort. I promised them I wouldn't throw any parties or do anything stupid. Easy enough, I thought. I'd just catch up on some Netflix, maybe play some video games. A nice, boring weekend. I'd settled into my usual spot on the living room couch, a bowl of popcorn balanced on my lap, and the latest episode of my favorite show queued up. As the opening credits rolled, a nagging thought tickled the back of my mind. Something I was forgetting. The alarm. Dad always said it before we went to bed or left the house. It was second nature to him. But for me, I'd never had to do it before. I paused the show, debating whether to get up and set it now. It was already past midnight. Surely, if anyone was going to break in, they'd have done it by now, right? Besides, we lived in a safe neighborhood. Nothing ever happened here. Laziness won out. I'd said it before I went to bed, I decided, turning my attention back to the TV. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, I was jolting awake to the sound of Netflix asking if I was still watching. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the TV screen and the faint glow of streetlights filtering through the curtains. I fumbled for my phone to check the time. 3:17 a.m. Great. I'd slept through half the night on the couch, and I still hadn't set the alarm. Stretching, I was about to haul myself off the couch when a noise stopped me cold. A soft thud, followed by the unmistakable creak of a floorboard. It came from upstairs. My heart began to race. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Old houses make noises all the time. But a little voice in the back of my head whispered, "You forgot to set the alarm." I sat perfectly still, straining my ears. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. I had almost convinced myself I'd imagined it when I heard it again. Another creak, definitely footsteps, moving across the upstairs hallway. Panic surged through me. Someone was in the house. My mind raced through the possibilities. Had my parents come home early? No. They would have called or texted. A neighbor checking on me? At 3 a.m.? Unlikely. Which left only one terrifying option, an intruder. My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I needed to call 911, but I was afraid any noise would alert whoever was upstairs. As quietly as I could, I unplugged my phone and swiped to unlock it. That's when I remembered we had security cameras. Dad had installed them last year, more as a precaution than out of any real concern. I'd always thought they were a bit over the top, but now I was immensely grateful for my father's paranoia. With trembling fingers, I pulled up the security app. The app took an agonizingly long time to load, each second stretching out like an eternity as I listened for any more sounds from upstairs. Finally, the camera feeds appeared on my screen. I could see the driveway empty, the backyard also empty, and my breath caught in my throat, the upstairs hallway. There, illuminated in the eerie green glow of night vision, was a figure. A man, dressed in dark clothes, was slowly making his way down the hallway, testing each door as he went. This was really happening. There was a stranger in my house, just feet away from where I sat frozen on the couch. My mind raced. What should I do? Run? Hide? Try to confront him? Every option seemed impossible, fraught with danger. I watched, heart pounding, as the man reached the end of the hallway. He was at my parents' bedroom door now. I saw him try the handle, then pause when he found it locked. For a moment, he seemed to consider his options. Then, to my horror, he pulled something from his pocket, a small tool of some kind, and began working on the lock. I had to do something. Now, moving as quietly as I could, I slid off the couch and onto the floor. I needed to get to a phone. The landline in the kitchen would be best. I could call 911 without worrying about my cell phone's ringer giving me away. Keeping low, I began to crawl towards the kitchen. Every tiny noise, the brush of my clothes against the carpet, the faint creak of a floorboard, sounded thunderous in the silent house. I paused every few feet, listening intently for any sign that the intruder had heard me. I had almost reached the kitchen when my phone, still clutched in my hand, vibrated. I nearly jumped out of my skin, fumbling to silence it before it could make any more noise. It was a text from Mom. Hope everything's okay. Remember to set the alarm before bed. Love you. The irony would have been funny if I wasn't terrified for my life. Just as I was about to continue my crawl to the kitchen, movement on my phone screen caught my eye. The intruder had managed to open my parents' bedroom door. He slipped inside, disappearing from the camera's view. This was my chance. With the man occupied in the bedroom, I might be able to make it to the front door and escape. I got to my feet, my legs shaky beneath me. The front door was only about 20 feet away. I could make it. I had to make it. Taking a deep breath, I started towards the door, trying to move quickly but quietly. I was halfway there when a floorboard creaked loudly under my foot. I froze, my heart pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. For a moment, there was silence. Then, unmistakably, I heard footsteps upstairs, quick and purposeful, heading towards a staircase. He'd heard me. Panic overtook me. I abandoned all attempts at stealth and ran for the door, my sock-clad feet slipping on the hardwood floor. I could hear him on the stairs now, coming down fast. I reached the door, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grasp the deadbolt. Behind me, I heard him hit the bottom of the stairs. He was in the foyer. Finally, the deadbolt turned. I yanked the door open and burst out into the cool night air. I didn't stop to look back, just ran as fast as I could down the driveway and onto the street. Help! I screamed, my voice echoing in the quiet neighborhood. Somebody help me. Lights began to flick on in neighboring houses. I saw Mr. Johnson, our next-door neighbor, peering out his window. When he saw me, his eyes widened and he disappeared from view. Moments later, he was running out his front door, a baseball bat in hand. "Tyler, what's wrong?" he called out, hurrying towards me. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe. I just pointed frantically back at my house. Mr. Johnson seemed to understand. He pushed me behind him, raising the bat as he approached my still-open front door. "Who's in there?" he shouted. "The police are on their way." I don't know if he'd actually called the police or was bluffing, but it worked. A dark figure burst out of the house, sprinting down the driveway and disappearing into the night. Mr. Johnson started to give chase but thought better of it. Instead, he turned back to me, putting a comforting hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay, son? Are you hurt?" I shook my head, still too shaken to speak. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. The neighbors had called the police after all. As the adrenaline began to wear off, the reality of what had just happened hit me. I started to shake uncontrollably, tears welling up in my eyes. Mr. Johnson guided me to sit on the curb, keeping a protective arm around me as we waited for the police to arrive. The next few hours passed in a blur of police questions, neighbor concerns, and frantic calls from my parents. By the time the sun rose, I was exhausted but too wired to sleep. As I sat on the couch, a blanket draped over my shoulders and a cup of untouched tea cooling on the coffee table, I couldn't stop thinking about how differently things could have turned out. If I hadn't charged my phone, if I hadn't woken up when I did, if I hadn't remembered the security cameras. The police officer who'd taken my statement approached, a kind smile on her face. "You did good, kid," she said. "Quick thinking with those cameras. You should be proud of yourself." I nodded, managing a weak smile in return. Proud wasn't exactly how I felt. Grateful, yes. Lucky, definitely. But mostly, I felt changed. The world seemed a little darker, a little more dangerous than it had just 24 hours ago. As the officer turned to leave, she paused, looking back at me. "Oh, and one more thing," she said. "Don't forget to set the alarm next time." I couldn't help but laugh, the sound bordering on hysterical. "Believe me," I said, "I never will again." The first flash of lightning illuminated my living room like a photographer's strobe, followed almost instantly by a deafening crack of thunder that shook the windows. I jumped, nearly spilling my tea, and let out a nervous chuckle. I'd always loved storms, but tonight, alone in this big old house, the tempest outside felt more ominous than exciting. I settled deeper into my favorite armchair, pulling the throw blanket tighter around my shoulders. The wind howled outside, rain lashing against the windows and sheets. It was the kind of night where you appreciate being indoors, safe and dry. Or so I thought. I was halfway through my book when it happened. One moment, I was immersed in the story. The next, plunged into darkness. The sudden absence of light was jarring. The silence that followed even more so. The hum of the refrigerator. The gentle whir of the ceiling fan. The low murmur of the TV I'd left on for background noise. All gone in an instant. For a moment, I sat perfectly still, listening. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside, the house was eerily quiet. I fumbled for my phone on the side table, using its dim glow to navigate through the darkness. "It's fine," I muttered to myself, trying to calm my inexplicably racing heart. "Just a power outage. Happens all the time in storms like this." But as I made my way to the kitchen to find some candles, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The house felt different in the dark, larger somehow, full of shadows and unfamiliar shapes. I found the drawer where we kept the emergency supplies and pulled out a flashlight. Its beam cut through the darkness, casting long shadows across the kitchen. I gathered a few candles and a box of matches, then paused, considering my next move. I should check the fuse box. I decided. It was in the basement. Not my favorite place on a good day, let alone during a blackout. But I was a grown man, for crying out loud. I wasn't going to let a dark basement get the better of me. As I approached the basement door, a floorboard creaked under my foot. I jumped, then laughed at my own skittishness. This old house was always making noises. Still, I found myself listening intently for a moment before opening the door. The beam of my flashlight disappeared into the inky blackness of the stairwell. The air that wafted up was cool and damp, carrying the musty scent of old boxes and forgotten things. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs, my free hand trailing along the wall for balance. Each step seemed to groan under my weight, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent house. I was about halfway down when I heard it, a soft thud from somewhere above me, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. Those footsteps weren't coming from the floor I just left. They were coming from upstairs, where nobody should be. For a long moment, I stood there on the stairs, torn between the urge to run back up and the paralyzing fear of making any noise. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, moving across the upper floor. My mind raced. Had someone broken in, taking advantage of the storm and the power outage? But I would have heard a window break or a door being forced, wouldn't I? Unless they were already inside when the power went out. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I switched off my flashlight, plunging myself into total darkness. It felt safer somehow, as if by making myself blind, I could also make myself invisible. Slowly, carefully, I began to climb back up the basement stairs. Each step was an agonizing test of stealth, my ears straining for any sound from above. As I reached the top, I eased the door open just a crack, peering out into the darkened kitchen. Nothing seemed out of place, but the footsteps had stopped. The silence was somehow worse, filled with possibilities. Where were they now? What were they doing? I slipped out of the basement, gently closing the door behind me. My eyes had adjusted somewhat to the darkness, and I could make out the dim shapes of furniture and doorways. I needed to get to my phone, which I'd left in the living room. From there, I could call for help. As I crept through the kitchen, a flash of lightning illuminated the room for a split second. In that brief moment of clarity, I saw something that made my blood run cold, muddy footprints on the tile floor, leading from the back door to the hallway. They weren't my footprints. I stifled a gasp, pressing myself against the wall. Someone was definitely in the house. The realization brought with it a fresh wave of terror, but also a surge of adrenaline. I needed to act, and fast. The living room was just across the hall. If I could make it there without being noticed, I might have a chance. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the kitchen. That's when I heard it, a creak from directly above me. Whoever was up there was now right over my head. I looked up instinctively, though of course I couldn't see through the ceiling. But I could picture it all too clearly. A stranger in my house, perhaps armed, just a thin layer of wood and plaster away. I made a dash for the living room, no longer caring about stealth. I could hear movement upstairs, quicker now, heading for the stairs. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone from the side table, nearly dropping it in my haste. Just as I was about to dial 911, the screen lit up with an incoming call. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Chun. For a split second, I hesitated. Then, making a split-second decision, I answered. "Hello," I whispered urgently. "John, is everything okay over there? I saw your lights go out and—" I cut her off, my words tumbling out in a frantic whisper. "Mrs. Chun, listen to me. There's someone in my house. Call the police, please. Tell them." A floorboard creaked in the hallway, much too close. I dropped the phone, my body moving on autopilot. Without conscious thought, I found myself diving behind the couch, pressing myself into the narrow space between it and the wall. From my hiding spot, I could see a sliver of the hallway. A beam of light swept across it. They had a flashlight. The beam paused, then slowly began to move into the living room. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small as possible. The flashlight beam played across the room, illuminating the fallen phone on the floor. It lingered there for a moment, then continued its sweep. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, the light retreated. I heard footsteps moving away, towards the kitchen. Letting out a silent breath, I cautiously peeked over the top of the couch. The hallway was clear. This might be my only chance. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I vaulted over the couch and made a break for the front door. I was halfway there when a shout rang out behind me. I didn't look back, just ran faster than I'd ever run in my life. My hands fumbled with the lock, precious seconds ticking by as I struggled to open it. Finally, the door swung open. I burst out into the rain-soaked night, the storm still raging overhead. I could hear heavy footsteps behind me, but I didn't slow down. I ran down the driveway and onto the street, screaming for help at the top of my lungs. Lights began to flick on in neighboring houses. I saw Mrs. Chen's face appear in her window, her eyes widening in shock. A moment later, she was rushing out her front door, phone in hand. "John, what's happening?" she called out. I couldn't answer, couldn't stop running. I glanced back over my shoulder, expecting to see my pursuer right behind me. But the street was empty save for Mrs. Chen and a few other concerned neighbors emerging from their homes. Blue and red lights appeared at the end of the street, accompanied by the welcome wail of sirens. As a police car pulled up, the adrenaline that had been fueling me suddenly evaporated. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to my knees on the wet pavement. The next few hours passed in a blur of police questions and neighbors' concerns. They searched my house, but found no sign of an intruder. The muddy footprints in the kitchen were real, though stark evidence that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the storm-battered neighborhood, I sat on Mrs. Chen's porch, a blanket around my shoulders and a cup of strong coffee in my hands. A police officer approached, a sympathetic look on his face. "We've done a thorough search, sir," he said. "Whoever was in there is long gone. But we'll keep an eye on the place. Don't you worry." I nodded, too exhausted to speak. As the officer turned to leave, a thought struck me. "Wait," I called out. "How? How'd they get in? All the doors were locked. I'm sure of it." The officer hesitated, then sighed. "Well, sir, it looks like they came in through the basement window." It was unlocked. The basement window. The one I'd opened last week to air out the musty smell and forgotten to close. Such a small oversight, with such terrifying consequences. As I watched the officer walk away, I couldn't help but think about how differently things could have turned out. If the power hadn't gone out, if I hadn't heard those footsteps, if Mrs. Chen hadn't called, a shudder ran through me, one that had nothing to do with the cool morning air. The world felt different now, less safe, full of hidden dangers. But I had survived, and as the sun rose higher, chasing away the last of the storm clouds, I made a silent vow to myself. Never again would I take my safety for granted, and never, ever, would I leave a window unlocked again. The steam billowed around me, hot and comforting, as I stepped out of the shower. I reached for my towel, my mind already drifting to the homework I still had to finish. That's when I noticed it, the mirror. It wasn't just fogged up. It was completely obscured, as if someone had painted it over with a thick white coat. I frowned, reaching out to wipe a small circle clear. That's when I heard it, a soft thud from downstairs. My parents weren't supposed to be home for hours. I froze, water dripping from my hair onto the bathroom tiles. The house was silent again, but something felt off. The air seemed thicker, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I quickly dried off and threw on my clothes, my heart beginning to race. As I opened the bathroom door, a wave of cool air hit me. The contrast with the warm, steamy bathroom was jarring. I stepped into the hallway, my bare feet silent on the carpet. That's when I noticed the other mirrors. The one in the hallway, the decorative one above the small table by the stairs. They were all fogged up too. My mind struggled to make sense of it. How was this possible? I hadn't used that much hot water, had I? And even if I had, how could the steam have spread so far? I made my way to the top of the stairs, straining my ears for any sound. The house remained stubbornly silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Taking a deep breath, I started down the stairs, each step feeling like a mile. I reached the bottom and peered into the living room. Everything looked normal. The couch where I tossed my backpack earlier, the TV remote on the coffee table, the family photos on the walls. But the mirror above the fireplace caught my eye. Like all the others, it was completely fogged over. A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with my damp hair. This wasn't normal. This wasn't possible. I turned towards the kitchen, determined to grab my phone and call someone, my parents, the police, anyone. But as I stepped onto the cool tile floor, I froze. There, on the usually spotless surface, was a set of wet footprints. They weren't mine, they were too large, and they were coming from the direction of the back door. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone was in the house. Someone had come in while I was in the shower. Someone who was still here. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. I needed to get out, to call for help, but my phone was in my bag in the living room, and the front door seemed miles away. A floorboard creaked upstairs. I stifled a gasp, pressing myself against the wall. The sound had come from directly above me, from my parents' bedroom. Whoever was in the house was up there now, probably going through our things, looking for valuables. I had to do something. I couldn't just stand here, waiting to be discovered. Moving as quietly as I could, I made my way back to the living room. My bag was right there on the couch, my phone just inches away. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the fabric of my backpack. That's when I heard it. Heavy footsteps on the stairs. They were coming down. Panic surged through me. I abandoned my attempt to get my phone and instead looked wildly around for a place to hide. The coat closet was too obvious, the space under the coffee table too small. My eyes landed on the large cabinet where we kept board games and old photo albums. It would be a tight squeeze, but it was my only option. I yanked open the cabinet door and contorted myself to fit inside, pulling it closed just as the footsteps reached the bottom of the stairs. Through the small crack between the cabinet doors, I could see a sliver of the room. A shadow fell across the floor, moving slowly, deliberately. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. The shadow paused by the couch, right where my backpack lay. I saw a hand reach down, rifling through my bag. I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. "Please don't find anything valuable," I silently pleaded. "Please just take what you want and go." But the intruder didn't move on. Instead, I heard the sound of paper rustling. They were looking through my notebooks, my homework. Why would they care about that? The shadow moved again, this time towards a cabinet where I was hiding. I pressed myself further back, wedging myself between old board game boxes and photo albums. The footsteps came closer, and then stopped right in front of the cabinet. I could hear breathing now, slow and steady. A hand appeared in my limited field of vision, reaching for the cabinet handle. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for discovery. The cabinet door creaked open. "Megan, are you in there?" My eyes flew open. That voice, I knew that voice. "Dad!" I croaked, my voice hoarse with fear and disbelief. The cabinet door swung wide, revealing my father's concerned face. "Megan, what are you doing in there? Are you okay?" I tumbled out of the cabinet, a mix of relief and confusion washing over me. "Dad? But you're not supposed to be home yet. And the mirrors and the footprints." My father's brow furrowed in concern. "Slow down, sweetie. What are you talking about? What footprints?" I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. There were wet footprints in the kitchen, and all the mirrors in the house are fogged up, even though I only used the shower in my bathroom. I thought someone had broken in. Understanding dawned on my father's face, followed quickly by guilt. "Oh, Megan, I'm so sorry. I should have called to let you know I was coming home early. I got caught in that sudden downpour and came in through the back door. I must have tracked water in. But the mirrors?" I asked, still struggling to make sense of it all. Dad ran a hand through his hair, looking sheepish. Ah, that would be my fault too. The hot water heater was acting up this morning, so I had a repairman come look at it while you were at school. He had to release some steam to fix the pressure valve. I opened all the windows to let it out, but I guess it affected the mirrors more than I realized. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to subside, leaving me feeling shaky and a little foolish. So, there was never any intruder? Dad pulled me into a hug. No, sweetie, just your old man making a mess and forgetting to warn you. I'm so sorry I scared you. I leaned into his embrace, relief making my knees weak. It's okay. I'm just glad it was you and not. Well, Dad gave me an extra squeeze before releasing me. I'm proud of you. You kept your head in what you thought was a dangerous situation. That's not easy to do. I managed a weak smile. Thanks, Dad. But next time, maybe just send a text. He laughed, ruffling my hair. Deal. Now, how about we order some pizza and you can tell me all about your day? Minus the part where you thought your old man was a burglar, of course. As we headed to the kitchen to find the takeout menus, I couldn't help but glance at the still fog mirror in the hallway. It was amazing how quickly fear could take hold, how easily the mind could jump to the worst conclusions. But as I listened to my dad chatting about his day, the normality of it all slowly sinking in, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The house was safe. I was safe. And sometimes, the things that go bump in the night are just the people who love us most, trying their best to take care of us. I made a mental note to work on my observation skills, and maybe to be a little less jumpy. But mostly, I was just grateful. Grateful for my dad, for our safe home, and for the fact that sometimes the scariest stories have the happiest endings. As we sat down to wait for our pizza, Dad turned to me with a mischievous glint in his eye. So, do you think this counts as training for your future career as a super spy? I groaned but couldn't help laughing. Dad, please. If anything, it's convinced me to stick to my plan of becoming a boring accountant. Way less stress. We both chuckled, the last of the tension melting away. As Dad launched into a story about his day at work, I settled back into the couch, finally relaxing. The fog mirrors would clear, the wet footprints would dry, and this would become just another family story to laugh about at dinner. But I knew I'd always remember this day. The day I learned that sometimes, the most ordinary explanations can lead to the most extraordinary moments of growth, and that even in our safest spaces, a little caution and a lot of courage can go a long way. The grainy image on my phone screen made my blood run cold. There, in the familiar setting of my living room, stood a stranger. I blinked hard, hoping it was a glitch, a trick of the light, anything but what it appeared to be. But when I looked again, the figure was still there, moving slowly across the room as if they owned the place. My hands shook as I fumbled to call 911. My eyes never leaving the live feed from my pet camera. This couldn't be happening. Not to me. Not in my home. I'd installed the pet cam just a few weeks ago, a cute little gadget to keep an eye on my cat, Whiskers, while I was at work. It was supposed to be fun, a way to check in, and maybe catch some adorable moments to share on social media. Never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd be using it to watch a home invasion in real time. The 911 operator's calm voice brought me back to reality. I rattled off my address and the situation, my words tumbling out in a panicked rush. She assured me that officers were on their way and advised me to stay at work until they cleared the scene. I agreed, hanging up with shaking hands. For the next hour, I sat at my desk, unable to focus on anything but the live feed on my phone. The stranger moved through my house with an eerie familiarity, opening drawers and rifling through my belongings. I watched, helpless and horrified, as they pocketed some of my jewelry and electronics. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw the flashing lights of police cars through my living room window. The intruder must have seen them too, because they suddenly bolted out of frame. A few minutes later, an officer appeared on the camera, signaling the all clear. I rushed home, my mind racing with questions and fears. The police were still there when I arrived, taking photos and dusting for fingerprints. They asked me questions, but I felt like I was in a daze, answering on autopilot. Yes, that was my jewelry. No, I didn't recognize the intruder. Yes, I'd make a list of everything missing. As the officers finished up and left, promising to follow up soon, I found myself standing alone in my living room, the same room I'd watched the stranger violate just hours before. It looked the same, yet felt entirely different. The sense of safety I'd always taken for granted had been shattered. I walked through the house, taking inventory of what was missing and what had been disturbed. It wasn't as bad as it could have been. I tried to tell myself. They hadn't trashed the place or taken everything of value, but the violation felt deeper than just the missing items. They had been in my space, touched my things, seen the intimate details of my life. As night fell, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every creak of the house, every shadow, seemed sinister. I double and triple checked all the locks, drew all the curtains, and even pushed a chair against my bedroom door before crawling into bed. Sleep didn't come easily. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the footage from the pet cam over and over. In the quiet darkness, my imagination ran wild. What if they came back? What if there were more of them? What if next time I was home when they broke in? It was well past midnight when I finally drifted off into a fitful sleep. But my respite was short-lived. A noise jolted me awake. A soft thud, followed by what sounded like footsteps. My heart leapt into my throat as I sat bolt upright in bed, straining my ears in the darkness. There was again a creak, unmistakably coming from inside the house. My mind raced. Had the intruder returned? But how? I'd checked all the locks, hadn't I? With trembling hands, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The PetCam app was still open from earlier. I tapped on the live feed, dreading what I might see. The image loaded, showing my darkened living room. At first, I saw nothing out of the ordinary, but then a shadow moved across the frame. My breath caught in my throat. Someone was definitely in there. I switched to the kitchen camera feed. Another shadow, moving with purpose towards a hallway that led to my bedroom. Panic surged through me. They were coming. I looked wildly around my room, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. My eyes landed on the window. Could I fit through it? Would the fall be too high? The footsteps were getting closer now, right outside my door. I could see the doorknob turning slowly, fighting against the chair I'd wedged under it. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure it could be heard throughout the house. The chair scraped against the floor as the door was pushed open. A tall figure stood in the doorway, backlit by the faint glow of the nightlight in the hall. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. The figure reached for the light switch, and suddenly the room was flooded with brightness. I blinked against the sudden glare, my eyes slowly focusing on the person in my doorway. "Sarah, what are you doing sitting in the dark? Are you okay?" The voice was familiar, too familiar. I stared in disbelief at my boyfriend, Mark, standing there with a concerned look on his face. "And Mark," I stammered, my brain struggling to catch up with reality. "What? How? Why are you here?" He stepped into the room, his brow furrowed with worry. "I texted you earlier to say I was coming over after my late shift. When you didn't answer, I figured you were asleep. I used the spare key you gave me." He paused, taking in my wide-eyed expression and the chair by the door. "Sarah, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost." The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to subside, leaving me feeling shaky and slightly foolish. There was a break-in earlier today. I saw it on the pet cam while I was at work. I guess I'm still a bit on edge." Understanding dawned on Mark's face, quickly followed by guilt. "Oh, God, Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I should have called or knocked or something. I shook my head, managing a weak smile. It's okay. You couldn't have known. I'm just glad it's you and not, well, you know. Mark crossed the room and pulled me into a tight hug. I leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent, finally allowing myself to feel safe. As the tension slowly left my body, I couldn't help but chuckle softly. You know, for a moment there, I was considering jumping out the window to escape. Mark pulled back slightly, looking at me with a mix of amusement and concern. The second-floor window? I'm glad you didn't, although I suppose it would have made for quite a story at the ER. We both laughed, the sound breaking the last of the fearful atmosphere in the room. As Mark helped me put the chair back in its proper place, and we settled onto the bed to talk, I felt a sense of normalcy returning. But as I recounted the day's events to Mark, I couldn't shake a lingering sense of unease. The initial break-in was still unsolved. The intruder was still out there somewhere. And while I was immensely relieved that tonight's scare had turned out to be nothing more than a misunderstanding, I knew it would be a long time before I truly felt secure in my own home again. Maybe we should look into upgrading your security system, Mark suggested as I finished my story. And I'll make sure to always call before coming over from now on. I nodded, grateful for his support and understanding. That sounds like a good idea. And maybe you could stay over more often, at least for a while. Mark smiled, pulling me closer. Of course, anything you need. As we settled in for the night, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was the PetCam app, alerting me to movement in the living room. For a split second, fear gripped me again. Then I saw Whiskers sauntering across the screen, pausing to stretch lazily in the middle of the room. I showed the screen to Mark, and we both chuckled. Looks like someone's on night patrol, he joked. I smiled, feeling a wave of affection from my furry little guardian. Yeah, I guess so. As I drifted off to sleep, feeling safe in Mark's arms, I made a mental note to buy Whiskers some extra treats tomorrow. After all, it was thanks to that little pet cam that the real intruder had been caught. And in a roundabout way, it had also led to this moment of comfort and security. The world outside might still hold dangers, and it would take time to fully process what had happened. But for now, in this moment, I was safe. And sometimes, that's all you can ask for.